In this video, we'll be reviewing how to find the square root of numbers. In our previous geometry topic, we learned about numbers that are perfect squares. And these are numbers that have a whole number as their square root. So for example, if we wanted to find the square root of 49, then we're thinking of two numbers that would multiply to 49. So the square root of 49 is equal to 7, and this is a whole number. So here on the side, we see that we have the first 10 perfect squares, 1, 4, 9, 16, until we get to 100. Notice that these perfect squares can be rearranged in the form of a square. So here we have a square that has 9 little squares that can be arranged 3 by 3. And then here we have 16 little squares that can be arranged 4 by 4, and that gives us 16. The first 10 perfect squares should be memorized. So here we can see we have the first 40 perfect squares. So from here to 100, this is 121. So this 121, the square root of 121 is 11, square root of 144 is 12, and then it's 13, 14, 15, etc. So we have the first 40 here. Now we don't have to memorize all of these, but having a list of these in front of your face when you're working on some of these problems will be really handy. So let's take a look at our first examples. Here we have the square root of 25, so a number multiplied by itself that is 25, and that's 5. So we actually have two answers because we can say 5 times 5 is 25, or we could say negative 5 times negative 5 is also 25. So that's for question A. In question B, we have the negative on the outside. So that tells us that we only want the negative answer of the square root of 49. So the square root of 49 is 7. So our answer for this one is just going to be negative 7. So take a moment to pause the video and determine the answers for questions 1 and 2. All right, so taking a look at our second example, here we're going to be looking at some with fractions and decimals. So if we look at question A, we have the square root of 9 over 16. The first strategy we want to use is we want to see if we can make this fraction into a whole number, and then see if we can get the square root of that. And in this case, we can't because 9 over 16 is less than 1. So what we'll do is we're going to look at this individually now. So instead of looking at this as a whole of the root of 9 over 16, what we can do is rewrite it as the root of 9 over the root of 16. And then we can just evaluate the top and the bottom. So the root of 9 is 3, and the root of 16 is 4. So we get 3 over 4. But remember, when we have these square root questions, we can have the positive or the negative value. So we can actually have now instead positive or negative 3 over 4. And then for question B here, we have this decimal. So it's nice sometimes if we look at this decimal as a fraction, because 2.25 is equal to 2 1/4. And we know that that fraction is 2 times 4 is 8 plus 1 is 9, so 9 over 4. And then we can apply the same strategy we used in question A. So then this is equal to the square root of 9 over 4, which could be the square root of 9 over the square root of 4. And the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we get 3 over 2, and again, we have the positive and the negative values. So positive or negative, 3 over 2. So we could use this strategy with the fractions, but we could also do is, if we look at this list of perfect squares, notice that we have 225 on the list of perfect squares. And the square root of 225 is 15. So we could also use that to know that it's going to be 1.5 because 3 over 2 is equal to the fraction of plus or minus here, the decimal of 1.5. So that means, for example, if we had 2.89 and we wanted to find the square root of 2.89, well, that would be the square root, so 289, that's the square root of that would be 17. So that means for the square root of 2.89, it would be 1.7. And then if we do 1.7 times 1.7, you'll get 2.89. So here are your next 3 try it questions where we're trying to find the square root of some fractions and some decimals. So take a moment to pause the video to figure out what number 3, 4, and 5 will be. So in example 3, we're going to look at how we can evaluate expressions that involve the square root. So looking at question A, we have 5 and then we have the square root of 36 plus 7. When we see that we have this 5 on the outside and then it's to the square root, the symbol in between here that we don't see is a multiplication sign. So it's like saying 5 times the square root of 36 plus 7. So if we rewrite that out, we've got 5 times the square root of 36 plus 7, and we can evaluate that this is 5, and the square root of 36 is 6 plus 7. And we get here 30 plus 7, which gives us 37. And now typically when we have these questions where we're evaluating them, we typically take the positive value of the square root. So now looking at question B, we've got 1 over 4 plus the square root of 18 over 2. So in this case, we've got 18 over 2. Remember that first strategy is we want to see if 18 over 2 can be simplified into a whole number, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. So now we have the square root of 9, which gives us 1/4 plus the square root of 9, which is going to give us 3. So here we just have 3 and 1/4 as our answer for this one. Question C, we've got the square root of 8 squared. So we're going to evaluate what's inside the bracket first, right? So inside of the bracket, we have the square root of 81, and the square root of 81 is 9. And then we have 9 squared minus 5, and 9 squared is equal to 81, take away 5. And 81 take away 5 is going to give us 76. So what's good to know is if we have the square root of something squared, it undoes itself. So it just means that we get whatever is underneath the square root sign, which is an 81. So here we have 3 more questions that you can try out. So again, pause the video to try out number 6, 7, and 8. So taking a look at example 4, we're going to be solving equations using square roots. Now this should be really familiar because we did this when we were finding the area of a circle. We did this when we were finding the volume of cylinders and of cones. So hopefully this rings a bell. So if we're looking at question A, we've got x squared is equal to 81. And if we're going to solve this, what we need to do to solve for x is we need to take the square root of both sides. And when we find the square root of both sides, it undoes the squared part. So we get x is equal to the square root of 81, which is going to give us positive or negative 9. And then for question B, before we can use the square root, what we have to do is divide both sides by what we have here, which is a 3. So we have to divide both sides by 3 so that we get this that cancels out, and we get a squared is equal to 48 divided by 3, which gives us 16. And then to solve for a, we're going to find the square root of both sides, and we get that a is equal to the square root of 16 is 4, so positive or negative 4. All right, so you have 3 more questions, number 9, 10, and 11. We want to solve for these variables, and these are the last ones, I promise. So pause the video, try out these last questions, and we should have 11 questions in total done for this video.